And we are live.
Hey everybody, welcome to PDQ Live. Today we're talking about the cloud and why it's not real. So we brought in, because Andrew and I and Tara all have a sysadmin perspective on what's best for, but we figured we'd bring in some DevOps so we can discount everything that he says and ignore him like IT should.
Obviously.
So this is Mike. He is the Director of Awesomeness and All Things Great, I think is the title.
Close enough.
Okay.
Director of Platform Engineering.
Same diff.
That's what I said.
Man, there's fighting words going already here.
Oh my goodness.
Wow.
All right, so we were having a hard time on it's such a massive subject, and we were all sysadmin. We wanted to broaden it out so we can get kind of insight that maybe sysadmins don't have, because it's moving over to the cloud is not just a yes or no decision, and it's good to have a discussion on it. Mm-hmm. All right, so I guess the first point, according to this list right here.
Yeah, let's look at the outline. Who is this Michael, and what gives him the right to talk to us?
And everything great.
Right, he knows everything. Sorry.
What usually initiates the move to the cloud?
Well, can we start quickly though about where we thought we were going with this topic though?
Sure.
Where from the sysadmin point of view, because we thought we were going to talk about just data storage and moving just like a file server to the cloud, and what does that mean permission wise, and from a sysadmin point of view, and then kind of quickly discovered, there's a lot to it. And then I stumbled upon Michael in the lunchroom and realized I don't know anything about cloud computing, right?
But you were incorrect, because you were looking at it completely from a sysadmin perspective, which
True.
You do know.
True, I know that part, yeah, but there's a lot
just
more.
a different, there's more to it.
Yeah, so then starting to talk to Michael, and he knows everything about it, so here he is to chat. So yeah, let's start there. What usually initiates a company moving to the cloud? And Jordan?
Executives hear buzzwords.
That's right. Someone hears something in a conference and says, hey, this is a good idea, let's do it. How do we do it? And then you cry at your desk for a while. And
so in the rare case that it's an initiated thing, usually it is if your company is either has a customer base that exceeds just a normal like a standard region, or you start to go multi-state with your employee base. Mm-hmm. Having the availability where everyone is close to a resource or resources accessible is nice. Mm-hmm. I think is the main one. Tim in the chat said Active Directory, or basically identity access management, is a great place to start.
Yeah. Well, there are good use cases. So you're a brand new company, right? You have nothing on-prem. That's a great use case. Go to the cloud. That makes a lot of sense, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Small company. Your on-prem hardware is really old.
So small company, if you have a wide customer base. If everything is local, if I just make Jordan's caramels that I don't ship anywhere, I don't need to go.
Do you make caramels?
No.
Oh, okay. I bet they're good though. Okay, go ahead.
I have a new business. Mm-hmm. All right. So that's this is Happen Take. Let's hear from the DevOps expert, Director of Awesome. I can't even remember your title anymore.
It's Director of Awesomeness. That's what we just said. Okay. Now your take.
Well, so I've never actually been in a position where a company had to change to cloud. I've always been in a cloud first environment, because I've worked for startups that are just getting started and usually don't even have the capital investment to invest in a bunch of on-prem servers. And so you just naturally go to the cloud.
Yeah, and that's the big part is upfront hardware cost is very expensive. Usually going to the cloud is also expensive, but you can mitigate some of that. It is all just a cost analysis, I think.
Yeah, I think it depends on your workload. So at least from my perspective, the things I'm considering are customer-facing apps. I'm not as much internal employees' tools coming into the cloud. It's how do we serve our customers best? And when you have those kind of considerations, you're considering availability of, like, can these servers go down? Do you have redundant network, battery backups, all those different things?
I don't worry about that, because we all know servers run on static electricity from kittens. So any time it starts to slow down, I throw in another box of kittens, boost right up, everyone gets what they need.
I just heard kittens. Wow.
Well, welcome back.
Thank you. That went down the wrong tube. I'm back. Okay. Continue. Sorry.
Bad design.
Ooh.
All right, so I guess the biggest mistake, and this is where I think people that make the first jump, it goes bad and they pull back instantly, is it's just a lift and, hey, here's all of our stuff, put it out there. And that's a terrible idea.
Yeah, I think if you're considering moving to the cloud, you need somebody who knows the cloud and has worked with it because there's a lot of mistakes you can make. So that will definitely, I think a lot of people have run into this where you have huge costs on the cloud because you just put a bunch of things there, forgot about them, left them running, and they're not actually doing anything.
If you have something optimized for a localized server where that's all it runs, and you throw up in the cloud and it just can take those resources, it absolutely will, and you pay for those resources.
So that's the thing. It depends on your configuration. And so, yeah, you have to really you have to think about your capacity, or at least what you are requesting from the cloud provider. You can't just say, oh, I have a ton of CPUs available on-prem. It's a different mindset. Whereas okay, I can just request a ton because it's already there. Instead, in the cloud, you pay for everything that is allocated to you.
Yeah. So the way I view it is you decide you are going to make the leap. It is the first part should be so much discussion. I know we all hate meetings, but there's so much that can go wrong. And the way I would approach it, and I'm not saying this is the way you have to, is I would isolate one thing that lends itself well to being, whether it's an app or it's Active Directory, move only that with a lot of planning, make sure everything's dialed in. And once you have it to where you're getting the most cost-effective version, then look at something else. But everything you throw up there is going to be inefficient on resource usage, almost guaranteed. So it's just one by one, move what you can. And once it's locked in, if it's still working for you, it looks feasible, go and try the next thing.
So, yeah, I'm not sure it's so much inefficient. It depends on how you're also running it on-prem. Because if you're running virtual machines on your bare metal hardware, you've already got that efficiency loss. It's going to be the same. I think the main thing is I think a lot of people overestimate how many resources their applications are actually using. And so, yes, it's allocated to the server, but is your application actually using all of those resources? And so, when you actually move to the cloud, you don't need everything that you actually have provisioned on-prem. And the other thing is you have to over-provision when you're on-prem to handle spikes in
So
traffic.
You have to watch it a lot, right? You can't just set it and forget it. You're monitoring it and seeing what you're using and then changing it.
Yeah, so the cloud, basically, you provision what you need and set up auto-scaling. So when you have those spikes in traffic, it adds those extra resources. But then once the traffic is done, you scale back down and you're not paying for it.
And if you're not watching that, that's where it costs you.
Yeah, so if you just completely provision exactly one for one what you have on-prem, it's going to be extremely expensive. But that's where you have to have somebody who knows that cloud-first mindset to be able to optimize how things run so you can save on those costs.
Do you think that's where people get hit the most with cost, is they're not paying attention to that kind of thing?
Yeah. And so, and Timothy just mentioned Kubernetes. That's exactly right. It's Kubernetes, I think, in the cloud makes so much sense, especially on a Google Cloud, because they developed it and just the way it's seamless to really set it up. So they have a managed Kubernetes option, and it provides just a really simple way to, or I guess a standardized way to deploy applications into the cloud. And then it makes it transportable.
Did Tim read the outline?
Most likely.
That's upsetting. All right, so let's start over. What is Kubernetes? Because you hear the term all the time, but can you just give us a brief description of what Kubernetes is?
Yeah, so Kubernetes is software that manages. I'm trying to feel what's the right word to describe this?
Digital Raspberry Pis.
No, so it's a simple way to. I should not say simple. Actually, it's simple for me. Simple for not for people who don't know Kubernetes, but it's a way for managing containers, deploying them in a consistent way. Provides a bunch of tool set around networking, how things get deployed, how things scale up and down. Provides ways to apply standard security policies around all your pieces that are deployed.
Okay, and you can scale it up or down, or just up.
You can scale up and down.
Okay.
So usually, at a minimum, you need one server running at all times, I'd say, to answer any traffic coming in. You wouldn't want to go down to zero. And then you also, I'd say, you probably want a couple to have redundancy, and you want them in different zones. That way you have, if one of the cloud provider zones goes down, everything can just fall over to the other two automatically.
Okay, and that's something I read a lot about. People are scared of going to the cloud, the monopoly of the cloud, the big cloud providers. If it goes down, you're screwed. You're going to be in big trouble. So can you talk a little bit about that and kind of allay people's fears about what that actually means if it goes down?
Yeah. So at least in the context of Google Cloud, that is where my expertise is. I've worked a little bit in AWS and Azure. However, and mostly in Google Cloud, the way they make it really simple to set up redundancy across their zones. And so that's the same way we run Kubernetes here is we are in one of their regions, and then we have servers in every single one of the zones of that region. There's 4 zones in there. The one thing I really like about Google Cloud is they have set up their zones with really great redundancy geographically and just all the other ways that you would need to. So that if one zone goes down, it doesn't affect any of the others. And so in all of my time working in Google Cloud the last 10 years, I've seen only a single zone in a region actually go down. So as long as you are in the other ones, you have no issue.
But you didn't go down, just that one zone went down.
Yeah, just the one zone.
Okay. So that's just,
So if you're not doing multiple zones, you're just in the one, then you're just hoping that's not the zone that goes down.
yeah. But is that pretty typical in the pricing to have multi-zonal coverage?
So if you are going super cheap, you could run into this issue. And so it's like, we're talking like hundreds of dollars a month. Like if you're at that scale. And the first startup I was like, that was our cloud bills. Like we were paying $200 to $300 a month. And so it was just like, keep everything as small as possible. Happened to be the one zone that went down was the one we were in that time.
Okay, so
and so we
don't
did
do
go
that.
down. So now, like if you have a little bit more budget, you run in multiple zones. And so basically, but what you do is you split your resources evenly between them so that you're not over provisioned. You're just spreading your capacity across the redundancy zones. And so you don't actually have extra cost. You're just being smart in how you allocate everything.
That makes sense.
That's where the discussion comes in. That's what I think the ball is dropped most often is, yeah, we want to do this, and then they just jump in. And it feels like the architecting itself requires all of the time.
Yeah. If you set it up right, correctly. Okay, so can we talk about AWS quickly right now? Because I sent an article to these guys this morning that Amazon couldn't do it right. What?
No.
So that was on the serverless side.
Yeah,
And
Amazon
so,
is in the cloud. I'm sure they're using their own completely for their infrastructure.
Yeah.
I think going completely serverless is where it's all code out in the ether, whatnot. And I'm not surprised they couldn't. There's a lot going on with that one. That company's massive.
Yeah. But can you kind of talk us through, either one of you, why they failed?
Yeah, so I think the article that was mentioned was Amazon Prime Video. They had a monitoring service that was built entirely around cloud functions, and they moved away from that microservice architecture to a monolith and were able to save 90% of their cost. So as you move to the cloud, there's basically different levels of managed that you can get. So on-prem, you are fully managing everything. Then you can go one step into the cloud, and now you're just paying for VMs, but you're not actually responsible for the physical hardware, the networking, the electricity, those types of things. But then from there, there's different levels of managed. So like you can go to different managed services. For example, Kubernetes, Google offers a managed Kubernetes. So you don't actually manage the Kubernetes installation. You just control what you're installing into it. Then you can go even more layers deeper. So then you can go to app services and you're providing just an image and they run it. And then they have cloud functions where you're just providing code and they just run the code for you. But as you go every layer deeper, the more managed the cloud provider is doing for you, the more money you're going to pay them for. And so the cloud functions, while they can be very enticing because they promise scalability, at scale, they are extremely expensive. And so it's a very poor way to architect an app that you are planning to scale into the future. For little one-off things, sure, maybe it makes sense if you put the right controls around it, make sure it's maintainable, make sure there's documentation, people are aware of it. But I very much lean towards more building services using something like Kubernetes. That way, it's like it's a balance between a monolith and microservices, essentially.
So,
I have a couple questions.
Well,
I'm
this
sorry.
is the
Go
one
ahead.
where I think the biggest disconnect on sysadmin view versus DevOps is. And I think my note on this one is Andrew and Michael fistfight over functions.
Yes. But I have a question before we go there.
before we go into the
He said
fist fight?
something that I'd never even considered, and I don't know if you thought of this. You probably did. He said electricity. What?
Yeah, that costs money.
Oh, they bill you for electricity?
Oh, the cloud providers, no. No, that's something, no.
No, but they have to factor it into their costs.
Yeah, it's factored into the cost. So
I never considered that. Did you really consider that? I never thought that'd be part of the expense.
Yeah, they're not going to do anything that costs them money and not pass that forward.
I know. I just never really considered that might maybe really, really expensive depending on your size. Okay, well, that was a light bulb moment for me. Apparently no one else, but whatever. Okay. Anywho, can you just quickly describe the difference between the monolith and the microservice, just so we kind of understand what you're talking about there?
Yeah, so Monolith is basically putting all of, and my perspective is from the customer-facing side, like customer-facing app like Connect. Okay. So a Monolith is putting all of your functionality into a single app and hosting it that way. And so that would be the extreme on that side of a Monolith, is everything goes there. And that would be like in our context, like we have simple MDM and smart deploy, that would be, if it was true Monolith, everything would be one single app that's deployed. Okay. Then if you go to the microservices extreme, those would be things like cloud functions. And that's every single endpoint, every piece of functionality is its own service. I like the medium where it's like you have services that have core functionality that are related that go into a service, and you have them talking to each other. So like Connect is a product, Simple MDM is a product, and those are all their own services. And then maybe you have an authentication system, you run that as a service. Okay. And so that would be kind of like service level architecture instead of microservice, whereas like on an authentication, you could also then break into, I think it's not a great idea, but if you wanted to break into microservices, you could say, okay, token issuance for the auth system is going to be broken out into its own service. That would be a microservice. And so you could break out that piece into a cloud function, and that would be a microservice instead of just having all of the functionality around authentication in a single service.
Now, how is that billed? Because if you have a really large infrastructure and every time somebody's authenticating, are you billed per authentication? Because that could get really expensive.
So on cloud functions, yes, you get billed per invocation and time that it's running. Now, that's where, like Kubernetes, you're paying for the provisioned virtual machines that Kubernetes is running on. And so you're just paying for the compute. You can use 100% of it if you want, use 50%, have overhead, but you're paying a fixed price for whatever you have provisioned. But then you can set up auto scaling. So it's like, say you have a huge spike in traffic, Kubernetes can automatically add additional VMs so you can handle it. Once your traffic spike is down, then it would scale them down.
So these are all things you have to consider.
Basically, everything you're going to do is going to be some sort of charge somewhere. But now it's time for Andrew to unmute his mic.
Let's fist fight.
Defend functions, Andrew.
Do it.
Hit enter.
All right. Michael, you got some great points, man. You got a great perspective there, and I appreciate it. If you're architecting a huge application or just really anything that's kind of larger in scope, maybe look away from functions. But if you're a sysadmin, you're in the day-to-day grind, maybe you've learned some PowerShell over the years and you kind of know how to do some things, well, you can take advantage of functions and cloud functions. Azure functions is what I've experienced with, to give yourself a pivot point to run a small bit of code or a large bit of code to connect your IT world together, to have automation, have a touch point. One thing to really be aware of, though, is making sure that it is maintainable, like we've mentioned earlier, and making sure it has good documentation, because that can really kind of bite you. And I'm definitely guilty of creating a quick solution in an Azure function and not documenting it well, and then having to look at it a year later and being like, what on earth did I do? But if you have those PowerShell skills and you're a sysadmin trying to do more, I think it's a very helpful pivot tool, especially if you're not sending a ton of requests, thousands or tens of thousands. I think it's a cool option.
Yeah, definitely. For something that's not receiving a bunch of traffic, that definitely is a way to go. But like you said, you got to make sure it's maintained. I would say make sure DevOps is aware those pieces exist, because what happens if a person writes a cloud function, they leave the company, now nobody has context of where that's even at, it breaks, and now you have customer-facing processes for support or even internal customers now that don't know how to use.
So I will say, Andrew, this is Michael's first time. You don't have to destroy him that bad, but nice victory.
Oh, man.
Well, I'll also say, Michael, with Azure functions, at least, you can kind of create a pipeline around them. So if you do have a DevOps team, they can be involved. Perhaps there's some kind of pipeline that you can use to do some extra testing on the PowerShell, make sure what you're committing is good, and ultimately having it in source control. So if you need to revert or see changes over time, that's probably the better way to do things. If you're writing PowerShell, you should be using some form of source control, just even outside of Azure functions. But
another part of functions is, and this, I don't know if there's a actually, but I just see it as value, is a sysadmin that is writing functions is starting to get into a DevOps mindset, which is going to help encourage communication between DevOps and sysadmins. And if there's no communication there, you're doomed. So if nothing else, it's a great branching point where they can work together. As I understand it, you have a fantastic working relationship with the sysadmins here, which must be nice.
Yeah, I think that's actually really great for IT and DevOps to have close collaboration. So we actually do a lot of activities with that team to make sure we have very close relationships. And so DevOps has been able to help IT out by running some applications in our Kubernetes, and they've been able to help us run some things on-prem.
Better get that.
But I would say make sure that like there's clear definitions of responsibilities. Like if it's on-prem, IT is responsible. Like I don't go and like circumvent them. Like I make sure they are in the loop of anything I'm doing on-prem, and then same thing, anything they're doing in the cloud, we collaborate on.
You talked about documentation being really important. Is there a type of documentation you prefer, a program that you use to document all this that you like?
It depends on like whatever like tools you have already. Use those. When it comes to code and using a Git repository, I would say put documentation as close to the code as possible. So like a README on the code repository so people know how it's working. But then even in the PowerShell, like as you're writing it, I think something that people get caught up on comments is they'll basically write what their code is doing just as a comment. It's like, okay, I could have read the code to understand that. Instead, document when you made a decision of like, I did this because this other thing didn't work. That way, when you come back in a year, It's like, oh yeah, I already tried that. I'm not going to try it again.
Yeah.
So that's one of those, if you're building the module in PowerShell, actually the top section is designated for filling out all the documentation. So if you run Git help for the module you built, it'll go up there and read from those sections based on what you have in there. So for PowerShell, if you're building the module, all your documentation or the critical parts of it goes right there inside of it. It's easy to find. But I mean, that's just because PowerShell is the greatest thing ever written.
Now, I'm pretty sure Michael uses something because of me. It's called Terraform.
Yeah, so that's basically infrastructure as code, and it makes sure that anything you are putting up in the cloud is documented from an infrastructure perspective. So say you need to be able to recreate a service, you know exactly how it was created before. So for all of our DevOps, we don't actually touch anything manually in a UI because that's how settings get set, and somehow something is now working magically because somebody set a setting manually just to get it fixed. Yeah. But if you fix it all through Terraform, it's all recreatable in case your server gets corrupted. Now it's like, okay, how do I recreate this thing? It's like, let's remember 100 hours of Google searching to figure out this problem that I did again.
All those have different names, but whatever, we'll just say it, the template that you build in Terraform will rebuild that server exactly as it was. So if it's not working, you do that, it's working again. Something changed between A to B, so you know it wasn't part of the core of it, which is nice to know. Troubleshooting, and also it gets you back up quickly.
Yeah. So we know you're a Google Cloud guy. What are some other choices that you might suggest for a small to medium company? Just to start out. You're just starting out.
So I guess it depends on where your business is going. It's like, it depends on what you're doing. Like if you are a software company, you probably should be looking at a cloud provider. You probably need some technical expertise that understands the cloud. If you're not doing a software business, honestly, I'd be simplifying your requirements as like if you're first starting up and just like pay one of those website building services. Okay. Like don't go spend a bunch of money on some custom website when you're just starting up. But as like on the software side, there's different cloud providers you can use. I know a lot of people start with something like DigitalOcean. It's kind of like the beginner cloud.
Okay.
But then there's like AWS, Azure, and Google Cloud. I know there's a ton of other providers out there. Those are the main ones that just come to the top of my head.
Why do you prefer Google? What is it you like about Google?
So for Google, the main thing I've done is like over the last couple of years, I continually will compare how the different clouds are doing. And one of the main things is networking. So when you run networking latency tests against all the providers, Google Cloud against all the different regions, usually it's about 20 milliseconds faster. And I know it's 20 milliseconds. A lot of people will just scoff at that. But like there are applications that every millisecond really does matter, especially like when you're processing credit cards. You usually have a specified amount of time to respond to a request. So every millisecond matters because you need that processing time on the back end to detect fraud and run a bunch of other checks when you're approving those. So that was actually my last company I came from, is a banking startup.
Oh, gotcha.
So that's why I have that contact.
Michael.
But Yes.
I think that you're delivering well in the whole PDQ thing, right? It stands for pretty damn quick. So time does matter.
Yeah, every millisecond. Yeah, so another thing that I really like about Google Cloud compared to the other providers is I think they have done the regional redundancy the best out of any of the providers. So from what I've seen is Google Cloud, if a single zone goes down, it is just that single zone. I have never seen a multi-zone outage. I could be wrong, but at least in the zones I have monitored and cared about, it's only ever been a single zone.
Yeah.
I know other cloud providers have had incidents where one zone then took down all the other zones in their region. US East 4, if we, is usually the outage of everybody's aware of.
Gotcha.
I think we did have a question.
Yeah, we do have one question for you. All right. Are you ready for this one? Do you have any suggestions or resources for a developer turned sysadmin with only a little true cloud experience to learn Azure or others? Sincerely, Adam N.
So I will say a developer turned sysadmin has a massive head start on going into the cloud, just because a lot of it is going to become code based. So if you're used to doing it other ways, that's an awesome head start. As far as learning, I started going into Amazon's cert course, and it was basically we have 28 AI features. Which AI feature does this function? It was basically, can you name the name of the AWS service? I didn't find it useful. Is there a better way out there than that? Because that was a frustrating waste of money for me.
So I would say I also come from a developer background that did DevOps at the same time. I can't speak so much of like what the sysadmin needs would be, but if you really wanted to understand the cloud, having that developer background, I would build an app, or if you already have one, go and run it in the cloud. And you can usually actually do this really cheap. If you're not requesting a ton of resources, you could request as much as a single CPU. Well, sometimes even less. You can do shared CPUs. And so you can run things for $5 a month on Google Cloud. But I think you mentioned Azure. But that's what I would go do, is go set up an app, set up all the networking around it, get it installed and running and serving traffic through that cloud provider. And I think that will help you learn. Hands-on learning is, at least for me, it's the only way I can learn. I don't think the certifications are really ever going to get you much besides, knowing the name of what the product is.
As I understand it, later search within Amazon are better. But the first one, like the entryway, it was a pure name our 28 services and what they do. And neat. But while I was setting up to take the course for that, they also had to set up an account within their cloud-based service. So I do have a small little environment that I mess around with all the time, and I love it in there. It's great. So, yeah, I'd say, especially if it's just you and you're hosting it, it's going to be pretty cheap. Just build something out and just have fun. And I'm sure Terraform, if you want to start messing with that, it's going to have a free version at a certain level.
Yeah. Terraform is completely free. It's an open source tool.
Well, then
so
great.
Especially if you were doing anything on the cloud, I would especially practice doing it with Terraform. And I think a good way to learn Terraform is create it through the UI and then import the resource into your Terraform configuration. That way you can see exactly how it's configured. And then you can start learning that way. I would also say, don't just pick one way to deploy an app into the cloud if you're trying to learn it. Try to figure out all the different ways that you can and kind of learn the trade-offs, because each piece will have its own level of managed for you, and pieces that you can control, pieces you can't. Kind of understand, being able to understand the differences between all the products, I think, is huge when you're trying to make planning.
My take is Azure is so enormous now. I would spend some time, honestly, figuring out where you should be. It is so big now. There are so many parts of Azure. Learn what the different ones are first before you even start.
Tim brought up a good point, though.
What did Tim say?
Well, it starts with Active Directory, basically, because identity access management, if you're going to move anything up there, having your identity access management so you don't have separate authentication for different things
true.
that is a great place to start, just because that would give you a central way to log into everything at that point.
Yeah, because there's Azure and Entra and who knows what they're doing. They move it, I swear, every day. So that's very aggravating to jump in there.
All right, so now everyone knows that it's still terrifying.
It is, actually.
No, thanks for joining us on this one.
Yes,
this was an insight that we didn't have, as I said, but we would have gone straight into server configuration. And so seeing the global scale on why it's not just a sysadmin thing, I think is important. But I think the main takeaways are spend your time save yourself money by doing it right, and just make sure that you find the best of both worlds. Almost everyone is going to find the best of both worlds somewhere in a hybrid.
And get a Michael, right?
Everyone needs a Michael.
Yeah.
I mean, all right. Well, Mike said don't hire consultants in the
he
pre-show.
did. Engineering. He said don't.
Yeah,
hire
so
engineers.
don't hire Michael. He's ours.
He's ours. You can't have him.
For PDQ, I'm Jordan.
I'm Tara.
Thank you for joining our webcast today. Please do us a favor, like and subscribe, join our Discord, and leave us your comments. We absolutely love those. If you've got additional questions, reach out to our support forums. Have a fantastic week, and we'll see you back here next time.